going to start by draining the oil out of the oil pan with a 14mm socket. Remove the drain plug. As you unscrew it, make sure you keep upwards pressure on it. That way on the last thread it doesn't shoot out and you can remove it in a controlled manner. Okay, I'm on the last thread. Pull it out. Perfect. At this point, this drained enough. I don't need it to be completely drained. I just want the majority of the oil to be out. That way it doesn't come flying down on me when I pull the oil pan off. So we'll snug this up and then get ready to take the oil pan off. 10mm socket. I'm just going to go around and remove all the bolts for this oil pan. This one's actually a nut. You'll notice there are 2 nuts with studs on this oil pan. That's going to be helpful when it comes time to putting it back. It helps you position it. Oops. There's the other nut. Last one. Keep in mind the oil pan won't fall down because it's still silicone in place, so now we have to pry it off the gasket. At this point, I just want to get a pry bar or a little screwdriver and stick it in here somewhere and pry down. They don't give you a lot of areas where it's pryable, so this is basically your only option. The only thing about this is you have to be careful not to damage the engine block because it is aluminum and it will damage very easily. There we go. Oh. Gently pry it down. Still stuck on the front here. And there it is. There you go. There's your old oil pan. With a razor blade, I'm going to come in here and just scrape the old gasket off of this surface. You want it nice and clean and flat so that the new gasket has a nice area to seal up against. And at the end, after I'm done scraping this, I want to degrease it, so I'll come in with a clean rag and some brake parts cleaner and degrease the surface. That way the new gasket can seal up properly. So just go around the whole surface, remove everything that you see, anything that has to do with the old gasket, that is. And then we'll apply some new gasket to the new oil pan. Now that everything is cleaned off, I have a clean rag with some brake parts cleaner on it. I'm just going to go around the whole surface and degrease it. I'm going to do this one more time right before the oil pan goes on, but I want to get the majority of it off right now. You don't want any grease or oil here, just because otherwise, if you do, well, the silicone, the gasket maker, won't really stick very well, and then you'll have oil leaks right off the bat, which is no fun. So wipe the whole surface down. That's good enough for now. We'll come back and give it another wipe down later. Before I apply any gasket maker, I'm just going to take another rag with some brake parts cleaner and just degrease this surface too, just in case there are any fingerprints or oils, maybe from the factory or whatever. You don't want anything that will prevent the gasket from making a perfect seal. All right, that's wiped down. Now I'm going to use some gasket maker and just go all the way around. You want a thin bead all the way around, and if for some reason you can't get it to be continuous, well, first of all, try to get it in the middle. But if you can't get it to be a continuous bead, so if for some reason you have to interrupt it there, just make sure that when you start it again, the 2 ends meet. Otherwise, you'll have a gap, and of course, oil will make its way out through any little crack that it can find. Okay, there we go right there. I don't always like to do this, but I'm going to actually go back with my gloved finger and make sure that all the areas here are evenly spread with silicone. So like I went a little thick here, a little thin over here, so I'm just going to make sure it's even. Again, you want it to seal up as perfectly as it can. Let's give the engine block one last wipe down here with brake parts cleaner and a rag to ensure that there's absolutely no oil on this surface. And as you can see over here, it's got a little drip, so what I'm actually going to do is not just wipe that drip, but wipe a little bit inside to hopefully absorb any oil that might be running down in the next minute or so. That way I have time to set the oil pan in place before another drip falls down. So let's get the oil pan. And now this is the tricky part. You have to kind of make sure that it doesn't smear your gasket that you just put on, but also make sure it lines up. So past the subframe, perfect. Make sure you don't get any debris inside of it, obviously. And once you have it up here, you can line it up with the two studs where you took the nuts off of. That's what they're there for, to make things easier. Hold it in place, and I'm just going to start those two nuts. It'll be held in place, and I don't have to worry about it falling while I start all of the other hardware. Start them all by hand. It's very easy to cross-thread these because they're very small. The threads are very fine. And if you cross-thread them, well, you're not going to have a great day. So I try to start them in by hand, and then I'll snug them up with my tool. All right, so I let the gasket sit for 10-15 minutes just to start curing. And now I'm going to torque these to 69 inch-pounds. So the torque is very low on these, keep that in mind. Just go around and torque them all. And after I torque them once, I'm actually going to go around a second time, because usually as you torque the last few, the first few loosen up because the oil pan squishes the gasket in and it kind of seats itself into place. Last one. And I'm going to go around one more time. And last one again. Awesome. Let's get some oil in it. When you install the new oil pan, always make sure that the drain plug is tight, because they aren't always. Just like this one. Give it a little snug, otherwise oil will come out. So I'm going to replace this oil filter now before I fill the oil, just because it's basically doing an oil change at this point, which I recommend replacing the oil filter with the oil pan and with fresh oil. I'm using an oil filter socket because mine's pretty tight on there. Usually they should come off by hand, but whoever tightened this last made it a little extra tight. So I'm just going to try to position my oil filter wrench on there, remove it. Some oil will come out. This car's been sitting for a few days, so for me, no oil might come out, but if your car has been recently running, well, it will. So take that off, and let's get the new oil filter ready. I'm going to pre-fill the new oil filter just a little bit. Not a lot, because it does sit kind of upside down, but a little bit of oil in it will prime it so that the engine doesn't suck up air when it first starts, and lubricate this gasket. That way it doesn't stick. And of course, make sure that the old gasket came off the engine block. We'll give this filter a second to absorb some of the oil. And I cleaned off the surface here with a rag. Take the new filter, line it up, and thread it on. Once it bottoms out, which is here, don't go more than a full turn. For sure not. I usually go about half a turn. After it's bottomed out, that's plenty tight by hand. You don't need a filter wrench to tighten this. That's how you get it over tightened. Remove your oil filler cap, and let's put 5 quarts of 5W30 in the engine. Let's put the oil cap back now that you've put the 5 quarts in, and just to make sure, I'm going to check it, pull the dipstick out, wipe it off, and it may be a little bit over the full line because the oil filter isn't actually full and the engine has not run yet. As you can see, it's just a smidge over the full line, which is totally fine. If you start the engine now and run it for a few seconds and then check it again, you'll be right at the full. So that's perfect. Put this back. At this point, like I said, start up the engine and make sure you have no oil pressure lights, no check engine lights. Take it for a road test.